Hello and welcome to Why Medics Matter, a podcast for doctors by doctors training. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Amie Bearbridge.
And I'm Dr. Simon Fruser.
So today we are incredibly happy to be welcomed by Ellen Knox, and it is a consultant obstetrician at Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital. She's also an associate postgraduate dean in the West Midlands Deanery. Today we are here to talk about sexual safety. Thank you so much for joining us, Ellen.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me both.
I'm aware that this is quite a difficult and could be tricky subject to talk about. So I just want to say at the beginning, if anybody listening and this podcast maybe triggers something in them or something really resonates with them, we will put links on the show notes that people can access if needs be at the end of listening to the podcast. So, and then I'm going to start with asking a question, and I've been a doctor for 20 years now, but for the first 15 years of my career, I'd never heard of sexual safety in the workplace, to be honest. I think a lot of that type of behaviour was dismissed as maybe banter, or that's just what people did. Why do you think things have changed in the last sort of 4 to 5 years? Why are we talking about this now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there with what you've said, Amy. Totally agree. And I've been a doctor for even longer, and absolutely that resonates. I think a lot of people were incredibly brave and came forward and talked about this issue. And as a result, you'll be aware a few years ago, we had the Breaking the Silence document from the Royal College of Surgeons of England, which was a pretty harrowing, but nonetheless essential read if you haven't read it, where they surveyed consultants and doctors in training around their experiences of sexual misconduct, and also put together recommendations and suggestions of what could happen. And I think it was on the back of things like the Me Too movement and wider movements in the media, and really quite shocking tales of individuals that had come to light. And I think it was a real kind of wake up moment to things that, as you say, had been rife previously, not just in the NHS, in society in general. And I think society has changed. What we see as acceptable now is very different to what might have been seen as acceptable 20, 30 years ago. And things that were seen, for example, as comedy on the television 30 years ago are very, very different to what we see now. And that didn't mean it was right then, but we're seeing it in a very different light. And as a result of that, different legislation has come through that gives us further sort of strength, if you like, to change things. And I'm really mindful, as you say, every time I talk about this subject, and I'm by no means an expert, I am exponentially learning because I feel really strongly about this subject. But I've spent many hours now talking with people, with medical professions and in the multi-professional space. And so many people come up to me afterwards and say, that happened to me X years ago, I've never said anything. I'm so pleased we're talking about this now. We haven't got it all right yet, but we're certainly heading in the right direction. So I think it was because of people coming forward, because of the wider society changing, and then because of legislative changes, that it's all helping to move things in the right direction. So multifactorial, really.
I guess what I also struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of people struggle with, is what constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think, so there's the NHS Sexual Safety Toolkit and strategy that have now launched, give us those very, as you say, broad definitions of sexual. And I think that's where part of the problem is in that people's realization as what exactly is sexual harassment. So I think very few of us would argue with the definitions around sexual assault, sexual violence. But actually, there are so many other things like inappropriate images, inappropriate jokes, innuendo, people just overstepping the boundaries. And the difficulty is sometimes that's totally unintended to cause harm. Sometimes that has been, as I say, people's lived experience of what constitutes as humour. We have very close working relationships in hospitals and in primary care and in medical communities, and work in very fraught situations. And for some people, they develop very close friendships and have and discuss very personal things, and therefore have very personal conversations. And I think we almost forget sometimes that there's a wider audience to those conversations. I'm not saying the conversations were right in between two individuals. They might not be right at all. But sometimes those boundaries may be crossed. Now, sometimes they're crossed by people that do set out to cause harm, but sometimes they may be totally unintended as well. And I think people get very caught up with, well, I don't know what to say anymore, and we can't say things, and it's just a bit of banter. But actually, banter is about people being very much on the same page, sort of, sort of not with sort of a hierarchical power gradient, and with very clear expectations around that topic. And I think the lines can get blurred. I think as well within different specialties, you can see certain things. I'm an obstetrician, as you say. Part of my job is making people feel not embarrassed about certain topics. And therefore, certain topics may be discussed in my workplace that would be very out of place in cardiology. But that doesn't mean we should be blurring into crossing those lines of what is professionally talked about and what may be talked about personally. And that's where people, I think, can run into problems.
Absolutely. Do you think that the hierarchical nature of medicine, we've all seen it in surgery with the data that we've got from the report that you mentioned, creates a vulnerability within the workspace?
Definitely. And obviously we're doing a lot to address that. And but I think absolutely, and I see this time and time again with sexual misconduct, but with behaviours in general, in that people are frightened to come forward where something has happened because they are frightened of repercussions, or they're frightened that things won't be done. There was a very sobering quote from somebody who talked to the organisation Surviving in Scrubs, where they were told, we don't need you in the department, but we need him, referring to a more senior male colleague. And just to be very, absolutely, just to be very clear, when we talk about sexual misconduct, it isn't always male to female. It can be female to male, it can be same sex. It is statistically more likely to be male to female. And obviously on that occasion it was. But yeah, I think, again, in my own head, I am still an SHO, and SHOs don't even exist anymore. But in my own head, I am, one of the team. I'm, and if people are laughing along with me, they're laughing along with me because I'm hilariously funny. But actually, sometimes they're laughing. Well, hopefully, I am sometimes. But actually, they're laughing along with.
At you.
Yeah, well, yeah. But sometimes it's because I'm, in their eyes, a senior consultant, and and actually, I think that's where lines can get blurred, and people, and then hierarchically sometimes don't come forward because they don't want to bother people, because they don't think they'll be taken seriously, but more worryingly, they don't come forward because they don't think they're going to be taken seriously, or worse, it's going to be punitive towards them. And in smaller specialties, that can be particularly difficult as well. Simon, sorry.
Just picking up on what you're saying there, which is there's a fear of the hierarchy and the impact. So there's a bit of like, we don't want to bring forward. I remember doing a workshop in a trust where everybody, because we all knew he was the leery person, and everybody knew, and that the saying was, don't be in the room on your own with them. And he said, we tolerated that for years.
Yeah.
how do we move on from that sort of, well, it happened to me, and really, because it's very hard for the resident to have a voice, and I think there's still a very strong concern at times that the trusts don't always take it seriously. And for everybody listening to that point, I don't want to people to follow, because what we do know is the NHS England, Deanery, whatever it is, take this very seriously and hold trust to account. But as senior team members who witness this in the workplace, what is our role?
So I think several things. I think on an individual basis, we've now got very clear professional standards from the RCOG that not only should we behave well to our colleagues and to our patients, but actually it's our duty to be able to support those that we see having poor behaviours towards them or that come to us and disclose. And disclosures are a whole sort of separate subject, which I'll come on to in a moment. But also legislatively, the 2024 October amendment to the Worker Protection Act, to the Equality Act, means that organisations now have to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of their employees by other employees and by third parties. So in other words, there is a trust expectation that sexual harassment should not occur to staff or to patients or by each other. And so what does that mean? And speaking to legal employment lawyer colleagues, reasonable steps is obviously open to interpretation. But actually, if there are rumblings within a department and things are known about, actually that needs to be acted on. And so there's a very real drive for departments, for trusts to be doing risk assessments. And risk assessments would include that there is no sort of set pro forma for this. It's being worked on at a national level. We're doing some work regionally as well. But risk assessments will be things like, making sure car parks are safe, making sure there's no, lone working is supported. But also actually, if there are informal things being said about colleagues, then actually that needs to be properly looked into. Risk assessment isn't just about having mandatory training and signing up to charters. So as individuals, we have responsibilities. We have responsibilities in terms of empowering people with bystander training so that people can come forward and escalate appropriately. And obviously, if one sees somebody being subject to sexual misconduct, one has to maintain that person's confidentiality and anonymity. But if one is seeing a perpetrator act in a particular way, one has a duty to escalate that around that perpetrator, even if the person that is experiencing is kept confidential and anonymous, and there are ways of doing that. If one is a more senior person, then one may feel hopefully more empowered. If one is a more junior person, one should feel more empowered as well. But sometimes that kind of bystander role in a more may mean speaking to someone afterwards, making sure someone is supported, signposting, or knowing who to escalate to. And we see time and time again with disclosure that people don't escalate appropriately. And when I say escalate, as I said, it needs to be absolutely maintaining the confidentiality of the person that it's happened to. But because it's sort of, when one sees something like this, or when one hears of disclosures, it's almost kind of the emergency you don't prepare for, because it can leave people thinking, oh my goodness, what just happened there? And that's why I think we need to keep talking about it. We need to make sure that people know what processes exist. But more than that, we need to sort of think through, in my department, is it really safe? Are people really comfortable? Are people coming forward? Or as you say, Simon, to bring it back to what you were saying, are there people or situations or parts of the department where things are not as they should be, and actually we need to do something about it?
Can I just pick on the stuff you talked about, the disclosure and stuff? So I do a workshop with foundation training program directors, and we have what we call a clinic in the afternoon where we get people to present a challenge that they've had. So he sat in the middle of the floor and he said, it was Friday afternoon, I got called into the office with an administrator and a resident doctor, and she disclosed it on Friday afternoon. And we stopped, and I turned around to Bill to the room and said, "Stop this, Noria. What are you all going to do? It's Friday afternoon." So for those people listening, Alan, I wonder if you could help us about how to approach that, but also what processes and stuff people can access.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is often Friday afternoon, isn't it? Yeah. I think people get really worried about this and thinking, "Oh gosh, what do I do?" I think the first thing is to listen and to believe the person. I know that sounds ridiculous, but actually, as or simple, not ridiculous, but actually that is the most important thing. And we see time and time again that people are almost don't believe what they're hearing, not because they don't believe it from that person, but it might be about one of their colleagues, and they're just going, well, and try and excuse it as if to say, well, I don't suppose they meant it. And also, we are taught, particularly as more senior people, to sort of try and see if we can resolve things, and actually making sure that there's a proper investigation. If you are being disclosed to, your role is to support and listen to that person, just as you would do with a patient if they were telling you something dreadful had happened to them. So you are now listening, you are now providing a safe space for that person. You are now physically going to make sure that they are safe. If they got to go and cross the car park where this person is, or they got to go on the night shift with this person, actually that's not going to happen. You've got to make sure that they are safe, that they feel safe, that they are, when they leave the hospital, going back to a safe environment. And then it's very much, what do they want you to do? If they have disclosed someone's name to you and you know that somebody has done something to them, you then have an obligation in terms of the GMC to report that person's name. You can't hold on to that name. If they haven't told you a name, then you don't have to force it out of them. You obviously need to work with them, because if they've told you something particularly shocking that may then happen again to someone else, it's really difficult. But you've still got to respect that person's wishes. They have just been through something awful. You have got to make sure that they feel safe and confident and are able to take things at their own pace. Then, depending on who you are and what you are in the organisation, that may well need to be escalated to your medical director, to your RO. If this is a doctor in training who has spoken to you, you may well need to escalate that for them to the DME, to the dean. Now, you can still keep that doctor's confidentiality and respect their confidentiality, and respect their anonymity, but you've got to provide that support in place. And as I said, if they have told you, even if they haven't told you a name of a person, I would argue you would need to still speak to your RO and medical director and say something has happened here. But it's about, and people find this difficult because it is a difficult concept. You are not then going to be investigating this. You are in the supporting role, but you need to know, and you need to know within your organisation what the escalation should be. You need to know your GMC responsibilities, but most importantly, you need to make sure that person is safe right here, right now, and then what's going to happen beyond that, and whether they are going to be working, when they're going to be working again, and put in all those sorts of provisions. So that would be our first thing. There is good guidance within NHSE. There is good, there should be within each trust good guidance, and I think it's going away and making sure you know where that is, and so you can access it immediately if that happens on a Friday afternoon. We've got within our deanery first disclosure guidance, and it very clearly sets out to the person that's disclosing and the person that's disclosed what they should expect to happen in that process. And so if it doesn't happen, and we know sometimes it doesn't happen, that the person that's disclosing can go back and go, well, actually, I'm expecting this, and this is the support I need.
There's one of the things I've found in my research, like you said, that each organisation has to have a policy in place. But there's an NHS policy on sexual misconduct, isn't there, in NHS England? which has got some beautiful flow charts of about what should happen
Exactly.
and what you should expect of the people above you receiving the response.
Yeah, exactly. And we've worked on that further within our deanery. So it's sort of very resident doctor specific, because they might move organisations. Someone might be disclosing to you something that's happened in a previous organisation because they may feel safe to do so. And then there's something around, if you're the person that's been disclosed to, around your sort of support for that individual through what might be a very prolonged process. No, but you're absolutely right, Simon. And it's all our responsibilities to make sure we have an overview of that flow chart. But if you can't remember anything in the moment, the most important thing is listening and supporting and believing, and not saying, "Oh, I'm sure they didn't mean it," which people say out of shock. They don't mean it, but those sorts of comments further down the line can be so harmful to the individual that's been brave enough to disclose.
Some of my work as a paediatrician has been speaking to children and young adults who disclose abuse. And obviously there is an investigation process, and often alongside that there's a criminal investigation process.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I learned as a paediatrician is you do not have guiding questions. You've just got to listen. You've got to make sure you don't, in some ways, tamper with the evidence, potentially.
Yeah.
Which is, a real danger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as medics, we want to fix everything, don't we? And we've, and it's something where you've really got to go at that person's pace, and support and ensure safety, but you've really got to be led by them. And it won't just be a one-off discussion. It's, yeah.
Can I just pick up a little bit on the impact of sexual harassment on patient safety?
Yeah.
So, for example, a resident doctor or a medical student may have been harassed by a clinician, a consultant, another doctor. They're in a situation where they see a patient safety issue happening with that individual. They don't feel confident to raise that as an issue.
No.
Because how do we navigate that?
I think, you're so right. I mean, multifactorial there, isn't it? We know that if someone is just low level rude to someone, that it knocks that person's cognition. If it's a sexual misconduct incident, I don't think there are figures to prove it, but that's got to be a whole order of magnitude more. We know it has impact on the rest of the team around them. We know, as you say, if they've had an incident with a particular individual, then they're far less likely to speak up about anything, because they're going to feel threatened potentially by the situation. And sexual misconduct has an impact on people, not just in the here and now, but weeks, months, years further down the line. And if they witness then similar things later on, totally can knock things. Of course, patients can witness things. Sadly, things can happen from patients as well. But patients and relatives can witness things as well, which must, knock their confidence in everything. We spend thousands of pounds a year on human factors training to make sure that people feel able to speak up, to make sure that people are able to respectfully challenge things, to make sure that people can work together as teams. Well, if you're having sexual misconduct going on, even if it is, unintended sometimes, actually that's a massive patient safety issue, because that isn't, getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning, a safe environment for people to be working in. And actually we all need to be in safe, supported environments to give of our best, both as individuals and as the team. And I think hopefully people do sign up to that as individuals, but if they don't, it has a massive impact in terms of patient safety and outcomes and performance of teams.
Just to touch on something you mentioned briefly there was about patients. So we've talked about being harassed or affected in the workplace by a member of staff. What about if it's by a patient?
Yeah. So NHS has a zero tolerance approach to harassment to its staff and as I said, the Worker Protection Act, it protects us against third parties. But we all know patients need care. We all know sometimes they may not have capacity. They may have illnesses that actually are impacting on their behaviour through no fault of their own with certain things. But nonetheless, staff need to be protected. And, as I say, I talked to many different specialty groups, and this was particularly noted within A&E in terms of what they see as being zero tolerance may be different to what's experienced in dermatology as zero tolerance, for example, but it shouldn't be. And again, it's about that risk assessment. So it's about, do departments have, cameras in operation? Do they have safety buzzers, alarms for people? Are there particular individuals who are going through no fault of their own, are a risk? And then actually, are those risks being mitigated in terms of teams working together? It's about having that risk assessment put in place. And that's challenging. And we have a duty to provide care, although there are some incidences where, people just behaviours won't be tolerated and people unfortunately need to be removed from a building, but generally speaking, we have a duty to provide that medical safe care. It's not always people's fault, so therefore that risk assessment comes in, and that's where departments and trusts have got to take this really seriously.
You've talked so far about what the organisations need to do in the risk assessment and the complexity of it, really, because if it was easy, we would have done it.
Yeah.
If I was to take it from, because we're coming towards the end, if I'm a resident, SAS doctor, local employed doctor, and I've got some concerns, or if I'm a trainer, I've got some concerns, what bit of advice would you give to those two different groups?
So I would say escalate your concerns, and that actually we do want to take them seriously. And I know that's easy for me to say and difficult for people to believe until they see real changes going on. As I say, from a disclosure point of view, it's making sure that the right people know. From a kind of general concerns, I would say from a resident doctor, speak to, certainly within resident doctor forums, if you feel comfortable speaking up, depending on what the nature of the concern is. There is anonymous reporting within most organisations. I would hope that you will be able to do it within your organisation, but if you're not able to and you're part of a deanery, there are channels outside of the deanery. Within a department, again, through your education team, through the Director of Medical Education, or through your RO from the Medical Director, we are again sort of looking at how people can go in and do departmental interventions, working with departments. So if we're getting flags on NTS or net surveys, then sort of saying, actually, we're training up people to go into departments, to work with departments, to sort of uncover things, to sort of do walkarounds with the departments, to talk to people informally, to gather feedback, and then to do some training sessions with departments. Again, as you said, Simon, if it was easy, we'd have done it all already. But we're trying to develop materials that will help people work together. Yeah. Exactly.
Amie, as we come towards the end, I know that you're incredibly passionate about culture and workplace and the broad sense. I don't know if you've got any final thoughts.
Oh gosh, I guess the one thing that there's so many things I could talk about here. The podcast would probably last about 6 days. I think nobody wants to listen to that. I really believe that one of the strongest way forward for all of us within healthcare is active bystander training, because what we don't do is we see behaviour but we don't call it out. If we ignore that behaviour, we are condoning that behaviour, and we are saying that it's okay. And this is not necessarily just from a sexual safety perspective, but it also could be from a race perspective, from gender identity.
Absolutely.
It's everything. And from an active bystander training, I mean everyone in healthcare. I don't just mean a certain group of individuals. And I really do believe that if we all feel comfortable in a safe space at work, within that culture where we can say, no, that is not okay.
Yeah. And the language.
And the language, the challenging language to say, what? Sometimes I see things and I'm like, have I just really seen that? And it's enabling people from all levels across healthcare, from every single person who works in a hospital to the M&S, the Costa, to the wall clocks, to say that is not acceptable.
Not okay.
That is not okay. And I truly believe that is one intervention that we could probably do in this incredibly complex world that we work in that could make a difference.
Thank you, Amie. Thank you. I'm going to move away from a very serious topic, and thank you both, to something a bit more light, which is the question I ask all of our guests at the end of the show, which is, given what you know now, if you could go back and give yourself some advice in that first year as a new doctor, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, gosh. I guess a reflection that you will have, that you will have so many varied careers within your career. Actually, I have loved my specialty, but I likewise love talking to both of you, even though this is a terrible subject, but a really subject that I too feel very passionate about. The educational opportunities I've had, the different specialties I've worked with, and different professions I've worked with within medicine, and the patient interactions I've had. It's just been a huge privilege to do what I do, and despite putting both of my children off doing medicine, I would not have done anything different. I didn't deliberately put them off it. They just.
I've role modeling.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to summarize with a couple of things that I think I've taken away from a huge amount. Is the awareness of the Worker Protection Act changes, and that they're employing organisations have a responsibility, and they also have a responsibility to take reasonable steps when there is noise. Yeah, really important. And for supervisors and leaders, listen, believe, support. Try not to fix, and follow the escalation. So I'd like to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us today. I just want to say that any of our listeners out there who have been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed today, in the show notes, I will put all of the links and connections that you can reach out to at any point. A massive thank you, Ellen. A massive thank you to all of our listeners. And we will be back soon. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.